Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this weekend's edition of Book Bites. I'm very excited about my guest this evening. I've often talked about the importance not just of memoir, which there seems to have been a resurgence of, but at the same time, documenting our social history is such a big thing. When I read about it, I get excited that a new publication has just come out. It was launched on the 3rd of February and it's media buzz right now throughout the community. A collection that's been lovingly referred to as R55 or Roshnee 55, which is actually the origins and 55-year pictorial history of the Roshnee 1967 to 2022. Quite a mammoth collection, quite a magnanimous accomplishment, I would say. And I have none other, I celebrate this, and I have none other than historian and photographer, Mr. Yunus Chamda online today. So, Uncle Yunus, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to hear about this process. But firstly, congratulations on this magnificent accomplishment. It looks like it's been quite a long journey for you, and we congratulate you.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much for allowing me this time. Yes, there's a sense of relief, especially when you set off on such a long journey. There was a bit of weariness at the end because it's been a long road. But alhamdulillah, it's reached fruition. The book has finally been published. We launched it on Friday, the 3rd of February. And I've always wanted the book to be launched as a community initiative. So rather than a traditional launch of simply sending out a notice that, this launch will happen and asking people to come, we set up a 2 days of activities. We launched the book on Friday night. We had more people than we had anticipated. We had to fill up more chairs just to accommodate everybody. But more than that, it was just the spirit that seemed to pervade the event. And, it was all smiles and happiness and joy and people connecting with each other. And that was on Friday. And then Saturday, we had a whole day of activities, which was essentially storytelling, because we used the launch and the book to trigger a whole lot of stories. And we used the Saturday for storytelling more than anything else. And then, of course, to keep everybody excited and entertained, we also had a very boisterous market operating. So there was a good community feel to everything.
I think there's so much of power in our shared history and our stories, and it speaks to the beautiful support that you had, the overwhelming support that you had, and will continue to have, because what you've done is you've accomplished something very significant here. I think having spent so many decades on it, you do understand the relevance here, and to see people coming together and both celebrate this accomplishment, feel the pride, especially perhaps people from the Val and the Vereniging region, the Roshnee region, and the extended community, be able to come forward and not only support, but want to share their stories. There's healing in sharing our stories, but there's also a certain amount of reclaiming our power through this narrative, through sharing this narrative. Now, in your making of Roshnee, I read through the article on your website, you talk about starting back I really want to hear about your process, because I'm so excited about that. You talk about starting off in the 90s, conceptualizing this idea of documenting the history. You talk about having 240,000 images, access to that many, that much history. Where do you begin what do you choose to put in and to leave out? This could probably give you a library of information. Talk to us about your process.
Yes, you're quite right. I mean, the idea did originate sometime in the 90s, and it was really three friends who are passionate about two things that we have in common. The one is history, and these friends were a photographer, an excellent photographer named Isub Gatu, who was my mentor and who taught me lots about photography, and Haroun Pochee, who's a community leader in Roshnee and also has a very keen sense of history. So the three of us shared this common passion for history, but we also shared a common love for photography. And so it was really bringing these two interests together because you could tell the history through the photographs. And and we began to see the power of somehow bringing the two together, and instead of just a complete narrative with a few photographs, the balance actually swung towards a pictorial history, because the power of the images was quite amazing. And yes, we started in the 1990s, and we made a few false starts. We had ideas, we had meetings, and then nothing took off for a couple of months. But then really in 2007, I started working on this in some earnest. I can't claim to have worked on it intensively since 2007, but certainly in the last 7 years, it became quite an intense effort. Originally, we hoped to do the 50th anniversary of Roshnee, but we missed that milestone because we simply weren't ready. And at that stage, I wasn't satisfied with what I had. I didn't think it would meet the standard that I would be satisfied with. And so we gave it another 5 years, and I'm very happy that that I took that decision.
Well, it shows, I think it needs to be acknowledged that on the one hand, you had this beautiful intention to document this history, but also the perseverance. It really is a labor of love when you put a project together. It's not by any means a commercial project. It's not just something you're doing for fame or glory, but it really is an act of service to the community. I really believe that, and I think the love that you're seeing for this collection is definitely proof of that. And you do talk about the community coming together. I think this seems to have been a very organic process as well, because you say that people have come together during the course of your process to share stories as well. Speak to us about some of those stories, the nostalgia for the community.
Yes, so that was an important part of the process. Despite the extensive library of images that I have, my own images, but also those that were left to us by the late Isukatu. He left a wonderful collection of images with me before he passed on. And also Haroun Pochee also contributed several images. Over and above that collection, we reached out to the community and make several calls for people to dig into their archives and to get that shoebox out from the top cupboard and to look under the bed and find that suitcase that has a collection of old photographs. And when people did that and indicated that they had some photographs that were ready to share, I either went over to them or they came over to me. And obviously, once you start going through the photographic collection, there's a flood of memories. There's the stories behind the photographs, and I mean, it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience sitting with people and reminiscing and connecting with the past and the history that brings us here. The history of the Indian community in Vereniging goes back to the early 1900s. And so this book really covers, around 120 years of history. And it was wonderful sitting with people.
So you talk about the establishment of this sort of geographical space going back to the 1900s, but let's also talk about the apartheid history of the space. You say around 1968 when first homes were starting to be occupied in the area. Talk to us about what this meant, the Group Areas Act, in a way the resilience of the community, because we see that in pockets around South Africa. So we're talking specifically about this Roshnee area. I want to talk about our people and the resilience shown during the Group Areas Act. I mean, it was a time of difficulty, displacement. How is that handled? Do you have some sort of, give us some insight?
Yes, I mean, what really emerges, and if you take the 120-year history that is covered in this book, you can juxtapose it with the history of South Africa, and it goes back to the early years and the discovery of coal in Vereniging, and because of the Vaal River, the steel industry started growing, and that obviously attracted business people, and so business people started settling in Vereniging in the early 1900s. And of course, that journey also interplays with the political development of the country. And the Indian community had difficulties from the very beginning, even in the 1900s, even during the time of the Union of South Africa. Race was a major issue then already, and there were all sorts of restrictions that were placed on Indian people, as there was, of course, on African people and colored people as well. But the book shows how the community negotiated around those obstacles to flourish in business, and how they took the advantage of all the opportunities that they could find. And many of them started with very, very humble businesses. And some of those have grown into magnificent enterprises today. So, it's just wonderful to see that. But then came, of course, the Group Areas Act in the 40s. And uh, we also able to track in this book the resistance to the forced removal. So even when there were letters that were issued for Indian families to move out or to prepare to move out, there was resistance, because there was you're always connected with your home, the place that you live in, even if the conditions aren't great. The connection is not just material, because if you take Top Location or Asiatic Bazaar, that was quite common for Indian communities around the country, where they had a location for Indian people. And in Vereniging, what was called Top Location, it was dirt roads and very basic buildings, but the social life was so rich and so valuable to the people that even when they were offered Roshnee with its modern homes and tarred roads, um, uh, people resisted moving because of the attachment that they had to Top Location. So it was a very difficult move for many people. But they couldn't hold out eventually. They were forced out of Vereniging Town, they were forced out of Top Location, and then relocated to Roshnee. And you talk about the resilience, and it is noticeable in how the community then accepted their reality, that they had now moved to Roshnee, and they immediately started building their lives. They started building their lives in the way, and it's noticeable. If you look at the photographs, you see how they immediately started improving their surroundings. Top location of Vereniging Town, people never had gardens, but yet when they moved to Roshnee, suddenly they took great pride in their gardens and great pride in having an aesthetically pleasing environment. It's just amazing. And today, if you drive past the original 87 houses, you can hardly recognize them from those that were occupied in 1968. All of them have been improved beyond recognition. But this is just the community's um, uh, 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 efforts to improve themselves, and to improve their lives, and I mean to take pride in the community that they had.
We must show appreciation for our community's ability to stick together. That sense of community is important, whether it's times of celebration or times of difficulty, times of strife or any sort of that. So, I mean, these things show through in their resilience and their ability to build community, whether it's around the mosque and to develop the needs of the time, mosques and madrasas and whatever those might be. And it's really beautiful to see this all documented together so beautifully. Um, the other question brewing in my head is, there are lots of pioneer families, so to speak, and at the same time, this invitation for fluency, for an organic growth of a community. I remember a few years ago I was researching a political biography, the story of Malvi Kachalia, and I met, it must be about 10 years ago, I met a gentleman in Vereniging in Roshnee. Was it Mr. Abdul Haq Patel? He was in his 90s already. When I spoke to him, he was very lucid, and he was very, his memory was amazing. And I had some recorded interviews. I have no way of knowing if he's still around, but for me, the impact was already made to understand that there was a sense of community pride and also the sense of the importance of a history of a people, which, I really, really celebrate your collection and this, putting together of this compilation of Roshni's history. Speak to us about the launch, the day of the launch, and community reactions, immediate reactions from people, young and old, especially the nostalgia of the elders, and the sort of expectations perhaps of the youth.
When we launched the book on Friday, what we also set up an exhibition in the foyer, and we called the exhibition 100 from 55. So it was 100 selected images from the 55-year book, and we put up these 100 images, and it was it was wonderful to see the reaction as people entered the hall. I mean, the first thing they did was they walked through the exhibition, and already you could see the reactions of astonishment, surprise, the suddenly seeing their grandparents, or some photograph that connects them with their pioneer past, and all those reactions started from the time that they arrived. What was very heartening was that people entered, the people in the 60s and 70s, and many of them with their children in the 40s, and sometimes with the grandkids in tow. And as they went through the exhibition, you could see the elders talking to the younger generation, and the stories just started coming out. I mean, it was an outpouring. And at that point, we had taken a decision not to reveal the book. So they arrived at the launch. We had kept the book. The secrecy was amazing. People were bothering us days before to have a copy in advance. We resisted that temptation, but it was only after we had officially launched the book that they were able to go and purchase the book. And once they got the book, well, firstly, many of them thought that once they have the book in their hands, they'll simply open it and they'll flash through it in a few minutes. Well, that's impossible. This book is, it's 340 pages. It's A3 in size. It weighs about 4 kilograms. It's a massive book. And when I did my talk at the launch, I warned them that don't go home and start with this book till you've put time aside. Well, some of them didn't take my warning. They got home, they were too excited. They got around the table, they started with the book. And then I got these messages at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning saying, you can't do this to us. We all huddled around the table. We're going through the book. We can't put this thing down. And that actually went on for a couple of nights. People just simply couldn't put the book down. Uh, but it's obvious. I mean, it's their story, and who doesn't want to go through your own story?
Well, inshallah, there's sawabi jariyah for you in this.
Amin, amin.
I mean, just when you're talking, I get goosebumps thinking that there's healing in these projects of nostalgia. When we're in a survival mode, when you're just doing what we need to do to survive for the sake of our families, there isn't time to process a lot that happens to communities. So we huddle together, sure, and we support each other. A project like this just allows one to sit down in peace and silence and just enjoy, and to be able to share something with the next generation that is, it gives importance in such a great way, I think. So I congratulate you and all of the Roshni community for being able to celebrate this project.
Thank you very
Some
much.
yes,
There was just the Saturday after, there was just a whole lot of informal reunions that suddenly took place. And that was very heartening to see.
and especially coming out of COVID, where most of us were isolated from
Oh, yes.
families, extended families, and there were so many losses in between as well. Our lives were toppled over, so quite a poignant time. The technical question I had is, how many copies were printed? Are you on a print on demand? And have you sold out? Have you sold a lot of copies? Do you have a demand for more? I think every household probably has a copy by now.
We have a huge dilemma at the moment, because we decided to print 500 copies, and I was extremely nervous about the 500 copies, simply because the book is expensive.
Right.
It's a huge book that just we sold the book at cost, and that was about 1,000 rand. So it's not a cheap book, it's an expensive book. And at that price, I was extremely nervous. At one stage, I thought that I should ask the printer to cut that down to about 300, and let's see how it goes. But eventually, we went for the 500, and we sold that out by the Saturday. We had sold all 500 copies by the Saturday. So the first 500 is sold. We already have a list of almost 80 or 90 orders. And we think that once it is known that there is another run, I think that number will also grow. So the demand has been huge. The response has been fantastic. The books have been all bought out, but typically the way printing works is unless you don't have the same run with the same number, you can't get it at the same price. So we're busy negotiating the best possible deal because we want to cap the price, and we don't want it to become more expensive than it is already.
I think inshallah you'll have huge success because I mean there's also a diaspora to think about. People living in other parts of the
Yes.
world or families who have moved out or people who have gotten married outside of Roshnee thinking this is something for the children, for the grandchildren. So inshallah you'll get your numbers. I have no doubt about that. This is not a book for this time. I think it's a timeless book. And you'll have that kind of traction once, maybe wedding gifts or anniversary gifts or something of that nature as well, inshallah. What advice would you give to other families and communities who are putting memoir and especially community projects like this? What were some of the takeaways from your process over the last few years, even decades?
Yes, so well, the first thing I must concede is that there isn't one right way of doing a community history. I think there are many options. Um, uh, the options, the option that we took came about as a result of my interest in photography and the fact that I had this huge pool of images that were able to work for the decision that we took to go with the pictorial history. But there are many different ways of doing it. I mean, you could write it up just as a straight narrative. You could have it chronologically ordered. You could have just personalities and tell the story just through personality profiles. So there are many different ways of doing this. Um, the important thing is to get started. I think it's not as overwhelming as it might seem. It's just a question of getting started. And I have already been in touch with some other communities who have already reached out to ask, could I provide some support and some advice? And my advice was really you can make a start within 7 days. Because if you want to go the pictorial history, get your first batch of images, and that's the start, and it will just grow from there. If you want to write a narrative, get started. Just start writing. Don't aim for perfection. Just get the first draft done, and then you can always shape it. From there onwards. I must say that from a writing point of view, um, I've I've said this in the book. I think in the conclusion that my hope is that the next generation will look at this book and pick up the stories that are in the book that are not detailed enough, because I covered many areas and many of them superficially. So there are hundreds of books in this book. If people are interested, to take it up, and university students might want to do academic studies about the political developments in the Val in the 40s or 50s. There's great potential for academic work to come out of this, but also just family trees. I mean, I'm encouraging every family to put together the family tree. It is an extremely important part of your heritage, and sadly, we don't pay attention to that. And I realized that when I was doing the book, because when I sat with families and tried to work out, the family tree, I was amazed that some people couldn't go back more than 2 generations. They simply didn't have the information. They didn't take the time to sit with the elders and get the family tree done. But just today, I was at a wedding, and somebody approached me and said, there's a particular biography that needs to be written up, and would I provide support? And I said, absolutely. So it could be the beginning of many other interesting projects.
Absolutely. I think that if it gives inspiration to more narratives, family or, otherwise, then this is definitely your job more than done. So inshallah, you'll see a lot of barakah from this project, as you've said, as more people actually get their hands on it and work through it. Inshallah. So Jazakallah khair for the time you've given us this evening, and I wish you everything of the best with this and future projects. Inshallah, we'll have a chance to speak to you again when, with more projects on the pipeline.
Jazakallah. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for promoting the idea of community histories.
And so there we heard from Mr. Yunus Chamda about the fascinating book, the R55, the Roshnee 55 commemoration on BookBytes this evening, but also the significance of collating your history, your community history, our community histories, social documents that allow us to extend the narrative, to share the narrative, to build those bridges of empathy and understanding, but to understand our past and where we came from so that we can build something better for the future. Mr. Chanda brings with him a range of expertise from being a historian, a teacher of art and history, a mayor at some point, and now a full-on historian, documenting social histories throughout the community. That's it from us this weekend on Book Bites. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.